Okay, I think we're live. All right.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Facilitating XYZ Live. We are so excited to be back and to be chatting with a very special guest this evening. And this is our first, I think, evening, the after hours version of Facilitating XYZ Live. So we'll see how we'll see what that brings about. My name is Sam Killerman. I am the co-author of Unlocking the Magic of Facilitation with Meg Bolger and the co-creator of the Safe Zone Project. And I'm a huge facilitation nerd and fan of social justice facilitation, which is what we're going to be talking about, I hope, a lot today. Meg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Meg Bolger. I am the co-creator or co-author of the other projects that Sam just listed, and also a huge facilitation geek and nerd, though in this case I don't want to get into the debate between those two terms, and a social justice educator and facilitator. And previously, our guest today was my boss, or my boss's boss, really. She was a really big deal and one of my favorite humans to talk social justice, higher education, and so many other fun things. So I'm so excited to reconnect with Trey. And Trey, could you give us a little intro of who you are other than my old boss's boss?
Okay, I can do that. I think I can provide more context than that. My name is Trey Boynton. I am the Director of Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I've been in that position for about 3 years. Previously, I've done work in housing, building community across identity and all the things that come with that. And so for me, that's the way I orient into this work. I would describe my job as being in a student affairs professional, so I work with students so that they can find the support systems so that they can define their own version of success, whatever that looks like. So as long as I'm helping students be successful at the institution, beyond, in life, then that's my jam. I'm all about that.
Great. Thank you, Trey. Trey, I have to ask the first question, and it's, what was it like to be Meg's supervisor's supervisor? This is turning into gossip hour all of a sudden. I don't know if Meg was prepared for this.
I know. Did you know this was one of the questions? This is great. I'm happy to answer this. It was a delight. It was an absolute delight. And so part of what I can say is the work that Meg did for us in the time that she was with us continues to reverberate now. And I think that anytime we try to do work that's meaningful on lots of levels, the stuff that she produced for us in terms of building curricula, workshop, the frameworks, the background, and how we want to approach this work, it still exists in Mesa today, and is the things that she developed actually became a blueprint for other things that we've done. So the good news is that she, in the short time that she spent commuting from Ohio to Michigan, was well spent, and it lives beyond her time, and her ripple effect is still felt in really positive ways. So it was an absolute delight. We are both really big Brené Brown fans, so that was a lot personally for me to be like, hey, I just read this kind of life-changing book, and I wonder who I could talk to about it. And Meg was always hand up, front row, me. And just personally, it was a delight to be able to think about this work for me as both personal and professional. It's very much a synergy of that for me, and I think Meg very much was a co-conspirator in that way, and I just enjoyed it.
Great.
Was that totally uncomfortable for you to just get talked about?
I don't know how red I am, but honestly, some of that could be attributed to the fact that I just realized my computer is not plugged in, so I'm going to have to do that at some point. But I really do appreciate all of that, Trey, and appreciate that, and so excited to hear that the work lives on. I mean, as social justice educators, I think all of us, our goal is to keep doing the work because the work is never over, but also to create some of those really amazing kind of foundations to build upon. So I'm really excited to hear that. And one of my questions to you, because I honestly don't remember, is I remember you had just read Brené Brown and were life-changing book, but it wasn't immediately obviously a social justice thing, right? It was just life-changing personal book. And I remember being
would it have been Daring Greatly, or okay.
Yeah, Daring Greatly. I went out of order, so now I'm going backwards. I have Rising Strong, but now I'm reading The Gifts of Imperfection, and I'm going to try to go back. I don't know. I'm all over the place.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it was during Greatly, and I think for you it was just like a really personal and moving book, which is like as it is for so many of us. But for me, it was also one of those books where I immediately like I was just like, this is the social justice. This is how we should be doing this. And you were like, maybe. So can you like tell us about, do you remember any of those initial conversations, or even just like how you started to see Brené kind of leaking into social justice or into other work that you were doing?
Oh gosh, you're gonna be ready for the journey that I'm taking. It's so full circle that, gosh, the universe. I am a big believer that the universe conspires in your favor, and sometimes that's to tell you the lesson that you've ignored 3 or 4 times in a row, and sometimes it conspires in your favor to tell you what's for you next. And so, this conversation is so timely and so good because I think at the time I was like, and Meg will laugh at this because when I was done. Right, and I was listening to it on audiobook, which is how a lot of how I consume books these days with life and kids and cars and lawns to mow. And so I think for me it was, I remember I got to the end and I was like, yeah, that's all well and good that like I can be imperfect and I need to be super vulnerable, but like she didn't talk to a diverse enough group of people. And then literally the 30 seconds after I had like judged the whole thing, she's like, here's who my interviews were with. They crossed all these ages and identities, and like she was so purposeful in what she did. I was like, dang it. Can't claim that anymore. I guess I have to go learn how to be vulnerable. And it was just more about, again, that was for me, right? So Meg, you're totally right. It was about me being personal, and I remember you just being in a really different place. I'm like, it's a great idea for like life, but like this doesn't really affect what we do. And you're like, it's all about what we do. And I was like, I don't know. I'm going to hold off. And now more than ever do I think that and I still think there's some tension, right? Like, because I think part of what we have often relied upon is a group of people who are feeling marginalized in some kind of way to serve as narrative tellers, storytellers, all of these kinds of ways in which they need to reveal some hurt and harm and macro and microaggressions, and just life happens for people who are in marginalized and oppressed communities to then serve and be tools to educate. And that's where the tension for me was coming. I'm like, I'm just not there yet. Part of what I've actually shifted to say that for me, the vulnerability comes in around privilege, right? So I still don't think that there's always a need for the community that is targeted or oppressed or whatever that looks like, who is being hurt, to be continuing to be the educators. There's a space for that, and if people are in a space where they can, they should, right? But for me, what I did, and I did this on it, I was talking with a group of higher level administrators at a small liberal arts college in the Midwest, and I remember thinking completely differently about how to facilitate the concept that they didn't know how to talk about race, right? So I'm there, and I identify as a black woman, and I'm like, listen, here's how I enter the conversation and all that, and I just saw their eyes just kind of go, I don't know how to talk to her. She's going to be hard. I know she's kind of funny, but like it's going to be weird. And this fear just came over, and I said, okay, stop. Have you ever been in conflict before? And like no one gets to say no to that, right? And I just used something that was so universal and so common in all of our lives. We've all been in a fight. Everybody been in a fight. Sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. But we've all been in some type of conflict. And I was like, so what did you do when you were in conflict? And they had to get vulnerable around that, right? But it was much safer than race. Like, I'm ready to talk to you about the worst fight I've ever had in my entire life, rather than talk to you about how I don't know how to describe that group of black kids over there without saying the word black, because that's racist. And so we were talking, and I said, so you've been in a fight. Was that with like your partner, with your mom, with your friend, with your coworker, whatever that looked like? What were some of the emotions you were feeling? And so we went through that, and I was like, so you were sad, you were hurt. What happens when you're in conflict and someone knows more than you and less than you? And so what I did was I brought in the concept of Johari's window, right? So like the concept of knowing more, knowing less, depending on who knows what and who knows less, right? And we went around the 4 quadrants. And so we did this whole thing, and I knew they were so confused. They were like, I don't know what she's talking about. Why are we talking about conflict? I need to learn how to talk to people about race. This is not serving me. And so we said, okay, well, in each scenario, you have some emotions, you have some knowledge, you sometimes have less knowledge, but like you figure it out, right? Like, what do you do after the conflict when things don't go well, for example? Oh, well, we apologize, we follow up, we build relationships, or I decide that that's not sustainable and I need to give them space. Like all these options, right? All of these ideas, this creativity about navigating conflict. And then at the end, I was like, so you have all of these strategies, you have all of these emotions that you've identified some self-care about how you want to do that when it gets hard and easier. You've identified how to sustain the relationship and categorize it and have all these ways in which you think about it. I said, what if you use this all for race? And they were like, no. And it was great, right? Because I think what I had done for the first time is really kind of unjargon, and Meg knows this is my jam, so I need to make this as accessible as possible. It is so hard to talk about identity and power and privilege when I know it's going to be bad already. Like, this is the one thing that you willingly sign up for, to say, yeah, this is going to be kind of hard. So yeah, let's just go ahead and do it. Nobody does that, right? And if we knew conflict was coming, which is why conflict avoidance is a thing, I'm working through it, that you can actually, like, if you saw it coming, some people will do actively anything they can to avoid it, right? And still do. Sure. And there are times when that's safe, and there are times when it's not helpful. And there's the spectrum in between, right? Yeah. But what I think I was trying to do that totally relates back, I promise, to Brené Brown was taking something that was so dangerous and so risky and so scary without being able to name it scary. To give them the space to be vulnerable in a way where they could access all the things that relate to conversations around race and racism. And as white people, a majority of white people with a black facilitator, being able to say, this scares the crap out of me, without talking about it in a way that was so risky, but then completely made the loop back to be able to say, yeah, it's the same thing.
Trey, can I ask you a couple questions about that?
So
how long did you spend on feedback?
No, that was me turning my cup.
Oh, okay. How long did you spend on the that initial, like when you were just gathering all those feelings and gathering all that information from the group? About how long did you spend on that?
Well, they did it in small group, and it took a little time. This was the first time I've ever done it, and I did it with a colleague of mine, and it was like, let's try this out. Let's see if this works, which is like, of course, like 95% facilitation planning.
Yep.
You're like, let's try it. Who knows? And what I knew is I had safe space because my partner, who is so good in the moment, like they are masterclass at, I don't know if we're there yet. Let's tweak the following 3 things to get home our points. I mean, I just sit there and I go, tell me more. What do we do now? Like, it's just that good, right? So in the moment, they are top drawer. And I knew that if it wouldn't go well, that we could do something in the moment to make it shift, right? That we had that skill set in the room. And we had prepared mentally to be able to do that. So for us, it was small group around a time that you've been in conflict. Walk around all 4 quadrants of Johari's window and talk about the emotions that you feel for each one. So it was small group at a table. So someone could have the space to say, oh, this one time I was in conflict, and they're doing that with 4 other people rather than the whole room, right? So we knew that there was some level of comfort that needed to be, and this is a group that had been together before and needed to be together after. So we knew that even in the story sharing around conflict, maybe they were even unearthing some stuff about each other that they could work through. There was an opportunity to do that. Not the goal at all, but I'm sure they could look around the room and be like, I've probably been in conflict with you, and you pissed me off last week, and I just made up with you. Like that could happen. Right. And so it was something that was accessible with the people, and they did that in small groups at the table.
And about how long did they spend in those small groups before you brought it back and connected it to race?
20 minutes. Oh, okay. It didn't get to race until like an hour in. Like they were talking about conflict for a solid 50 minutes before I said, at the end, y'all have come up with a plan. why can't you use this same plan for talking about race?
And so the reason I'm asking is that investment of like those 50 minutes, maybe before you would have done 3 different activities in that time, or maybe you would have done like a walkthrough of the cycle of oppression and jumped into white privilege, or whatever it might have been that you would have done to that outcome in that 50 minutes. Like, looking back, obviously you think that was a good, and it sounds like to me like it was a really good use of time, and you think it was too. I know so many people when they're facilitating, they're really nervous about investing time in an experiential activity like that may not be directly related to what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're worried that they're not going to be able to connect it back or whatever. So my question is, how did you internally just know that this is going to be this is a risk, and we're gonna go out on a limb, but we're hoping this will be worth it, that they're going to have more learning or more powerful learning from these 50 minutes than if we had done 4 race activities that may have bounced.
Well, here's the thing. I think you're getting onto a great point. Those activities depend on who's the audience, right? So if I'm with a new group of folks who've expressed already our biggest concern is fear, I need to dig into that. I need to figure out a way to safely navigate them traveling in a place of fear that is a little bit safer than what we're talking about, so that they can make the correlation. So that's what we were talking about. Like, we really said doing the cycle of socialization and the cycle of liberation would allow them to also go here, right? Because I don't think the problem with social justice education is inherently, I don't get it. It's that it hurts to feel it, right? Like it hurts my heart that I belong to a community of cisgender folks that are trampling on the rights of trans folks right now. Like, I don't want to go there knowing what I know, because as someone who cares so deeply about that community as an ally and who experiences oppression in my other identities, it is so hard for me to think about that. The dog is having a small conniption, and I don't know why. But he's going to work out his emotional state. He's like really feeling his oppression right now. And so part of what I knew that to your point, the question was, how do we access fear for people around stuff that they don't want to talk about in a way that provides a parallel experience that will make it easier? It doesn't matter if I use the top 5 exercises currently au courant in the social justice community, right? Like, I'm not like going for popularity points. I'm trying to win the coalition of the willing. Like, you have people. These are the people who are never going to ever want to do this work. These are the people who already are co-facilitating with you. There's a whole group of people in the middle that we seem to ignore because we're so focused on this. My colleague in the Ginsberg Center, the director of the Ginsberg Center, talks to this about me all the time. She says, we spend all our time over here. We need to spend time over here and here, because these folks are going to come. And then you just leave these outliers, right? And if I can do this, if the resistance in these 2 fingers is I'm scared out of my wits, can I unscare them? Can I take care of that with them? Yeah. And that, I think, brings back to a place of vulnerability to both look at my own concerns and nervousness about this, to think, what do I need when I'm scared? I need comfort, I need safety, I need familiarity. And even though what I need is going to be different for each person, because we know that that's not universal, I'm going to access some of that and try to recreate that. So that's how I think we tried it. And I don't need the most popular one. I need it to work.
Yeah.
I'm trying to convince people to go with this thing called racial justice.
Yeah.
The thing that jumped out. Sorry, Sam.
No,
the thing that jumped out to me, Trey, too, was the kind of refocusing or pivoting to like what the actual problem is. So like oftentimes people, my friends will sometimes ask me like, hey, do you know anybody who can do a racial justice workshop? And I'm like, absolutely, definitely do. How long do you have? And they're like, about an hour. And I was like, okay, well, in an hour, I think has your group ever talked about racial justice before? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, so probably the only thing you actually need to get people to do in an hour is to say racism is really scary and hard to talk about, and all the white people in particular are scared out of their minds to admit that it exists. Like, and if you can get both of those done in an hour,
Yeah.
woo! Like,
Winning.
you did it, right?
You
But
nailed it.
nailed it. Like, but people want to jump past that. They want to say, like,
Yeah.
what do I do now that I know these things? And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, but we have to
Yeah.
first admit that, like, racism's a thing, and we have to admit that it's hard to talk about before we can go any further.
Right.
But people don't see that as like a productive learning outcome. And my question is, like, when somebody tells you, I really want to get like these 7 things done in a workshop, and you're like, how about we just admit that racism exists? Like, when you get that pushback, if people are bringing you in and you're saying, this is what we're actually going to be trying to accomplish, or I think we need to talk about fear way before we talk about race, like, how do you navigate that?
I think the same way that you did. I mean, I think if you talk about, well, what do you want to have happen after this? I think you're not doing this training because you're just trying to check off a box, and if you are, it doesn't matter what I do then. Because I'll take that, right? Like, if you're just doing it to say we did a diversity training, then I can talk about whatever the heck I want, and you shouldn't be arguing with me about my content, right? So, let's get that out of the way. If you actually want to do stuff after and have people talk about this after, what is your dynamic, and how are you going to address it? If you have a ton of people who are willing to do deep conversations at the water cooler about both The Bachelor and the dynamics of power and privilege that brings into society, you are willing. Let's go there. Let's talk about racial identity development. Let's talk about all this other stuff, and that is totally something that we can do. But if you have never talked about it, you probably need to define it for people, because I don't think that we have enough language to even identify it, right? And part of it is also knowing what, I'm trying to think of how to say this. It's almost like we know what's wrong with the conversation too. You have to know what's been wrong with how we've done this already as facilitators. I think there's been harm done at times when we want to just get in it because we're super passionate about it. I loved this when I was a teenager doing the cycle of oppression. That's what's great. And then you go, well, wait a minute, I actually didn't love it. It took me like 7 years to love it because I had to work through like the intense emotional reaction that was. Like, I forget all that stuff because now I do it for a living, right? So I like just conveniently forget that I was, in the fetal position later that day with like 4 of my best friends going, why are we doing this in hall director training? What does it matter, right? I forget that because I learned to love it, and I learned to get, and someone took the time to get me from being unwilling to willing, right? And that's what I don't remember. I just remember that it feels good right now.
Trey, can you talk about that idea of facilitators who may be well-intentioned or very excited or eager or whatever it might be, who can actually do more harm than good? So at the end of a training, they've not only not accomplished their goals, but maybe unaccomplished them. Can you talk about that?
Or like cause harm, right?
Yeah.
So even because part of the way I begin every diversity talk is I use these funny GIFs and it's about like, how do you come into this work? And so there's one where this little girl's like, like, I can't wait. There's someone who needs to like calm down. There's someone who's like got like a hair flip, like, I got this, it's all good, right? And someone who's like dying, right? And there's all these different ways in which we get to emotionally orient ourselves. And I think you have to be scanning for how you're feeling at any given moment. And I think that's huge for facilitators, right? Like, what's my goal today? Am I feeling particularly crunchy about the state of the world right now? I have to be really cognizant of how I facilitate if that's the case, right? There are times when I got to tap out on a conversation around intersections because it's the day of something significantly horrible happening in the world and no one's talking about race and something, right?
Yeah.
Or on a day where a great example of this for me was the day that gay marriage became legal. I identify as a queer woman of color. And it was the same day as the Charleston funeral where Obama spoke. And half of my community was completely celebratory, and I was celebrating with them. And half of my community was in deep mourning at a time when we have literally regressed. And that was a day I had to facilitate something right around that time, and I was like, y'all, I'm feeling a little crunchy. I'm feeling not so awesome. I'm feeling pulled. And I needed to note that because I didn't want to pull people in with me. And I think that's probably some Brené Brown stuff of like knowing where you're feeling at any given moment, emotional intelligence. Oh, the universe, I get you. Okay, fine. I'll listen to it. Fine. But really checking in with my emotional status to say, I'm really burnt. I'm crispy on this part. I'm solid here. But if it starts to take a turn, working with my co-facilitator or working with myself to even name that there is in the space even, sometimes I'll say, I'm feeling a little bit raw in this area. So does anyone have any thoughts about how to ask this question? Because I'm in this space as a community member too, right? Like I'm in there as a person who holds identities too, so why not also model that vulnerability the way that I would hope that someone would do for me?
And Trey, I remember talking about this, I think it was after the Oscars, like somebody said something really problematic and then they just got like flamed on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm feeling really mixed about this because I don't believe they deserve to be shamed even though they did something really, really problematic, like absolutely problematic.
Yeah.
And I remember like having this really intense discussion about like, can shame ever be educational? And kind of like my opinion of being like, no, it can't. Like that, like when you shame people, you stop the ability for them to learn.
Yeah.
And I think for me, like I'm feeling a little crunchy or I'm feeling a little burnt on this is when it's like I don't have the capacity not to just like flame on you here.
Yeah.
So like I'm not gonna be the one doing this. And
I'm gonna tap out. Yeah.
I'm gonna tap out like that. And that's where I think really, really problematic, like social justice education sometimes comes from is like they have the fire burning, right, to do it, but unfortunately the fire's also coming out of them. It's not just like fueling them to do the good work. It's like coming out. How do you, like if you were to help somebody separate like when you need to tap out and you're like, nope, too crispy, too burnt for that, like versus like, okay, I think you can hold that energy or that space and still be productive. Like if you were working with somebody or if you were like advising somebody like, yeah, no, I think you're ready to go for it. Like how would you help separate those two things?
I think it depends on the relationship you have with the person who's trying to do it, right? That like this is getting down to like good supervision, right? This is good collegiality, this is good supervision, this is good partnership, this is your co-facilitator. When you're facilitating together, these are the conversations that you should be having. Is there something of your salient identities, is there something that's super, super salient for you right now? And what is that thing? Because if I say my blackness is pretty salient, my blackness is salient because a little 4'8" black girl just carried the American flag for this team, and that's like the dopest thing I've ever seen, right? Like I am so thrilled that like my daughters got to see a girl in the pool and a girl flip around on the floor. No disrespect to the quality athletics that both things are, but like that my daughters just literally got to see possibility. Like my blackness is on fire right now in such a good way. Like my blackness, my melanin is on fleek. I'm feeling good. So that saliency for me is all positive. So my ability to give grace right now is pretty stoked, pretty high. Now, you send me to a couple meetings with my high-level administrators or leadership, that's going to die down a little bit. And after a meeting, I may be like, listen, I need not to hear someone else talk about their trying. Because trying is not doing, and I am at try. I am all out of try. I need some do. And to know that, so I think it has to be beyond the conversation of co-facilitators just saying what's salient for you. What is your saliency looking like right now? Are you swinging like in a way that's around super positive, super ready, super open, or are you feeling a little closing off, like you want to protect your people? And what happens if someone shows up like this right now? So if someone's like, I don't know what this means, this whole black girl magic, I'd be like, well, here's what it means, bullet points 1 through 8, right? But if someone were to say that around the time when when some of the recent shootings happened, and you're hearing both sides and so many of the debate around who matters, and how they matter, and all the different people that are so critical to the whole excuse me, so people that are super involved. So there is police involved, there are other people who are not black, and then there are black folks. Everybody matters, and comma, there are people that matter differently about their experience based on their experiences, right? That conversation I am less and less willing to have, because I feel like I've had it 35,000 times. And there's still people who are just like, but I just wanted you to change your mind. And I'm like, but I'm not gonna. And to be able to know both of us exist in that space, that's the conversations you need to have. Those are the conversations you need to have. And if someone is feeling flame on, let's use their flame on in a different way. So flame on not in a facilitative role, but flame on as a note-taking role. Like flame on as, you know, creating a curriculum that's going to push the person who's ready to be pushed. You know, can we devise a training that has people who are in the coalition of the willing, who want to get super pushed, who are willing to be super, who are willing to go beyond their comfort zones, who are going to go to their learning edge? Let's put that facilitator with those folks in small groups to say, y'all, I'm coming for you. And to name it, I'm going to come for you. Let's develop some ground rules or group norms that tell you when it's too much, and when am I feeling, like, how do we all develop some mutual understandings so that we all know how we're doing in this space? Because we need the pushers. The pushers are the people that get me out of my sometimes idealistic frameworks and need to get critical. I need the people that are fire. I need them on my wall, in my Facebook wall, and in my real life wall. I need them because I will operate always from a place of community and love, and give people grace. Sometimes I need to shorten that grace period, and the people who do that fire are critical for me to do that.
I loved that articulation though so what I wrote down was giving grace capacity. Like, how high is your capacity to give grace today? And is that going to match the amount of grace that likely people are going to need, right? Mm-hmm. In order to like stay present, stay focused, right? In that particular workshop. That's I like that idea of giving grace capacity, because I do think you can be like, I'm maxed out, like that's it. Right. From this point forward, please know that ignorant comments are going to no longer make me feel like I can respond with grace, and so I'm going to pass it off to you, co-facilitator, or other participants.
It's like a bank account, right? I got to know when my balance is low. Like I have to know if I need a loan, right? And sometimes a loan is a break, right? Right. So you know the classic facilitation, moment, which when something just drops and is super heavy and you don't know how to navigate it, is, you know, why don't we take 5 minutes, just write a quick note to yourself on the index card about how you're feeling. I'm going to do the same, and that moment is giving me a little bit of money in the bank to be able to process what I need to think about doing next. Yeah,
such a good trick. What are some other tricks that you use like that, like the go-to or the always in your toolbox and you pull them out when you need them type trips?
What do others think about this?
Yeah.
When like this like most ridiculous thing gets said, or just something that you are just like, wow, my nonverbals need to be so neutral. And I'm going to offer an inquisitive face to say, what do others feel about this? Is there someone who has a reaction to what was just put into the group? You know, whatever that looks like, it's and however it's natural for you. I think, you know, for me, it's like, hey, what do others think about that? You know, so-and-so has just put this out into the group. Are there people who are in the same space, or are people occupying some difference around that? And to offer some dissonance and the welcome of dissonance. And then I think if that doesn't happen, right, because people are often, if people are triggered, if people are in their fields, if people are silent, or the people who are vocal have decided that this is the time that, of course, they stop talking. Thank you. I could have used you to, like, yeah. Anyway, if that's where everybody is, then what it does is say, actually, I get to have a reaction to that. Mm-hmm. And I often will use a question to seek for more information about what I think I just heard. Because again, I'm hearing it through a super filtered lens that are all the identities that I hold. So let me ask you, I'm going to try to rephrase what you said. Oh, here's a good one. Can you say more about that? Are you going to be just as problematic twice? Because I need you to rephrase that.
The worst when they are, when you're like, say more, and you're like, no, I didn't know. We just had to go deeper into that hole. Something you just said jumped out to me, though, which is like, I'm hearing this through a super filtered lens, which is like all of my identities. Yeah. So in the book me and Sam wrote, we have a whole chapter talking about being neutral and how it's like not possible, and how it is in fact harmful as a facilitator to claim neutrality. Yeah. It's crap. So cool. So I would love to hear like your thoughts on if somebody like said like, well, you're not being very neutral about this. Like, as a facilitator, isn't your job to be neutral? Like, no, how would you?
I have an agenda. Like, why? I'm going to just tell you, like, I work in an office that does racial justice. I feel like you should know coming in, I have some stuff I believe fundamentally. And if I don't, part of it is, here's what I offer to be true. And I think, in my better moments, I don't do this always, and I just realize I need to do it more. In my better moments, I say, here's how I enter the conversation. I enter as a little black girl who always wondered if it was her personally that stuff wasn't happening for her the way it was for other kids. That because I wasn't pretty enough, because I wasn't smart enough, because I wasn't X enough, that I internalized that as being me, but in reality was some of the systems of oppression that are existing around race and gender, right, and class. And so I bring all of that to the table in how I approach this work. That's who I do it for. In me, the me that it was that person who could have used all of these trainings early on is the little girl that's still inside of me facilitating here. So just know that's how I come to this work. And I did that for the first time in the same space that I did the Johari's Window thing. And I felt so released of these kind of like expectation of holding a lack of position about stuff that I feel deeply passionate about. And I think it's disingenuous. Because if the personal is so professional as I claim to be, and people love it when I'm inspirational, people don't love it when I'm challenging, right? You can't get to pick. If it's personal all the time, and let me own that, and let you help me figure out when that's showing up in helpful ways and not helpful ways. Because when it's super personal and my story is helping you understand, frame, whatever, then you're all about that. Except when it's challenging you, you're probably not about that life as much because it's making you either uncomfortable or it's a learning edge for you. And so for me to come in and say, yeah, I'm not going to make this personal is unrealistic. It's deeply personal. I wouldn't even be here if I didn't care about this. I'd be an accountant. Like I could be deeply personally committed to balancing somebody's numbers. But that's going to look differently than this because there's a different interaction happening. Did I answer your question? I'm trying to think.
Well, yeah, and how do you respond when somebody? So that I think that a part of Meg's question, or the part that a lot of people struggle with, especially for newer facilitators, people who are new to the work, they struggle with this want to be neutral, and they definitely struggle when a participant in the training is like, okay, so maybe you say all that, and a participant's like, okay, so you're saying that you're not neutral, that you're coming from an agenda, or that you have an agenda in this. I thought that the point of this was for this to be neutral, or the point of this was for us all to have equal, space in this room, or whatever they might say. How would you advise that a person who's facilitating a training push back against that, or explain that idea?
Yeah, I have a metaphor that I use. I call this the volcano kind of concept. So last time I checked, and I do this in higher education or in any context. Last time I checked, as human beings, as college students, as X entity, the last time I checked, you kind of wanted to grow and move. You wanted to know more today than you did yesterday. We don't kind of come to college to leave it exactly the same way that we found ourselves. So, yep, the 18-year-old version of me is still here at 21. Nothing has changed. I'm exactly the same person. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're in the business of development and growth and change. And sometimes, if you take the concept of a volcano, it will be under the surface. You will not see a lot. It will just kind of be like lingering. You may see smoke a little bit, or you may not. It could look dormant, but something is happening under the surface. Sometimes the plates are shifting so violently that lava starts to come up and flow. Sometimes it's so big that it just completely goes up in the air. There's smoke, there's lava, there's eruptions. But here's the thing that I like about volcanoes in Hawaii. Every time the lava that travels down the volcano through all of its previous existence and hits the shoreline, a little bit of shoreline gets created when the hot meets the cold, and Hawaii grows by inches every year. If we could think about our time at college, if we could think about our time at a job, that I'm trying to grow my edges. I want to get better than I was before I was here. In order to do that, some stuff is just not going to be neutral. Some stuff, my neutral is your pushing buttons. Your neutral and the concept of literal neutrality and free speech, which I love deeply, the ability to critique all the things that I don't like about my world and my society, my work, my family, whatever that looks like, is the same thing that rubs me very violently when people are saying the most hateful and hurtful things. That I can value it and I can get it intellectually, but it hurts my feelings that we are so neutral. And I have to learn and live through that. I have to name what my values are because of that, and ultimately, I grow. Does that help? Does that make sense? Sometimes my metaphors take a left.
I think it does. I think it does make sense. I think I would love to like have the ability to transplant what you said into like a scared little new facilitator and being like, well, if you just think about it this way, and like have the boldness to say what you said. But I do think it's. I think for me, like one of the reasons that so much of that claim is being made is because of this unfortunate myth that we have put out there in the social justice community that we can create fully inclusive spaces. Like that we say, I want this space to be inclusive, and we're not saying the rest of the sentence, which is like, for people of color, for trans people, for LGBTQ identified folks to feel included in ways that they do not in other spaces, and that's why we're doing pronouns, or that's why we're doing like terminology at the beginning, so we're all using common language. When we say, I want to create a fully inclusive space, then you give people the chance to say, I don't feel included. I thought this was supposed to be a space for me. And so like, do you feel that tension, or like that's something that I've moved away from saying, like inclusive spaces. I say like affirming spaces, or get like real specific after the word inclusive. Yeah. Is that something that you've run into, this idea of like, I don't feel included, so you're not doing your job?
Well, I think it's you're getting into the concept of safe and brave, right? And I think this concept that safety means no risk, no challenge, no disagreement, no discomfort. And I think we talked about the concept of safe space so universally, it's been rendered powerless and so ubiquitous and kind of like easily defined by an individual that it has no meaning. It's like, I don't know, the word diversity and inclusion. I'm just kidding. But I think the concept of safety, and which I just want people to feel safe to have a conversation, because we know that fear, right? It's almost like we're coming full circle to the first question. We know that fear is at the heart of this work. The resistance to this work is the fear that I'm going to make a mistake, do something wrong, screw it up, hurt someone, or perpetuate something that doesn't look like slavery, but feels like I could have been, right? And that's the fear. So what we said to people in order to have the conversation is, come. It's safe. Yep. Come to us. We'll make sure it doesn't hurt. Just come to us. Now, if we promise that and then don't deliver on it, they feel like they've been bamboozled, right? So I agree. We don't say safe for whom, totally. And I wonder if it's also, I just also say it's going to happen. Like at some point, let's guarantee that we're all going to feel uncomfortable. Let's guarantee that we're all, what if we have some agreed upon things? I've never done this, but this is just like totally inspirational space, right? What if we said, let's agree upon stuff that makes us uncomfortable? What do we want to have happen in this space? Like, how cool would it be to frame ground rules, not around what you need, but what do we think should happen in order for learning to happen? Oh, we just gotta come up with something, right? Like, what if you said, like, okay, so answer that. Like, what would you need in training? What would be a discomfort or something that you would need to engage and have to lean into resistantly in order to learn in this space? I would need to have someone directly challenge my thoughts.
I have seen that, and I like wish I could say like, oh yeah, it totally works, because I think so I've seen that happen twice, in a classroom and in like a retreat setting.
Okay.
Where people said like, what discomforts do we expect to happen? And people were like, I want people to call me out. I want people to tell me I'm wrong. I want people to let me know they're uncomfortable. And going full circle again, some of that puts back the burden on the people who are either farther along in their process or who are marginalized to do the educating and saying, hey, what you just said is really harmful. Here's how. You told me you wanted me to call you out. I'm doing it. And then you get people going, oh, but you called me out in a way that makes me feel really uncomfy. And get back to the beginning. So I think for me, like that goes back in some ways to the Brené Brown stuff of like, I need to not feel shame, and I need people to pull me out when I am feeling shame so that I can stay in like a uncomfortable but not shaming space. Yeah. Like for me, helping people separate the difference between like perhaps like what feels hard and uncomfortable and what feels like potentially shutting you off. Like maybe separating those two things could get us to better ground rules or group norms. Yeah.
The tough part when I think about things like that is that, Trey, you said this in the beginning, the idea of what makes somebody uncomfortable or what makes somebody, what someone needs is going to be so different from person to person. And as soon as you invite that, depending on the size of the group, if you have more than 10 people, you're going to end up with things that are in direct contradiction of one another. And then you as the facilitator is going to be in this horrible spot where you're like, okay, I just facilitated this activity where I was making all these promises, and now I either have to pick favorites in this room or we have to admit that this like ideal I just created 5 minutes ago is impossible. So you can maybe create a meta learning out of it. It's so tough.
I think that's why. So I've correctly avoided this specifically by saying like I'm not going to create safety for you. Part of what I need you to understand moving into this is that I do have an agenda, and that agenda comes from my position, the identities that I hold, and again, it's not neutral. Like let's just let go of this expectation that it's going to be super easy and neutral. The best stuff that we invest in is hard, so try hard for a little while with me.
Yeah, and there's this level and trust that I'm going to take you in a place where it's not going to be neutral, but it's going to benefit you, or you're going to grow, or you're going to learn in a meaningful way. Whereas you talked about your volcano, your edges are going to expand, and you're going to have a better understanding of your work, your life, who you are, whatever. Trust me.
Right. And that's hard, right? Because if someone has come in before me and completely nailed them, that their willingness, and so here's what I can do. If they had a horrible experience and they're all the way over to this side, can I bring them closer to the center? I don't need you to walk away saying, I'm now going to go to every diversity training that I sign up that is offered to me in the company or at the institution. I just need you to be a little bit more open today than you were yesterday. And that's the learning that happens for that person, right? And again, what we will focus on is the one person who is vocal in the room who is resistant to something for whatever reason.
Yep.
Right? Part of what I won't spend a lot of time on is trying to convince you that this is a worthwhile endeavor. Just trust that I think it is. I wouldn't be spending the time up here if I didn't. And so I'm going to invite you to just either observe the dynamics that are happening, but don't hinder other people's opportunities as well. So I have to also mentally say, I'm not going to spend so much time on you that we're now going to get off track.
Yeah.
I love the idea, because people often say, like, what do you do with like that participant, or what do you do when you have somebody who just is really disruptive? I love the idea of, I'm going to invite you to observe the dynamics that are going on in the room right now and not participate in them. Like, I just think that's such an incredibly, like, it's active, it's diplomatic, it's kind, and it is literally saying, please don't talk. You can watch, though. Like,
inviting you to not talk. I love it. Yeah.
I am extending a heartfelt invitation for you to observe.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And Trey, the other thing you said that I was laughing about is this idea that people will be like, do you think this works? Like, are these trainings even effective? And I can't think of how many times Meg and I have answered some version of that question, and how both condescending that feels and absurd, because we've traveled however many miles to get into this room. We've clearly dedicated some portion of our lives to this work, and for someone to be like, does this even work? It's like, well, I sure hope so.
Yeah.
So, you know, Trey, there's one, I know we need to get into the lightning questions, but I want to ask you, so you said in that last answer, you were talking about how maybe doing that is more difficult if the last person who is doing a training with them, the last person doing like a diversity training or a social justice training with that group, really, I think you said, nailed them. And what would you say, like, if you, going into the work as a facilitator, how do you approach a group, or what would be like the number one thing that pops into your mind if you know that the experiences they've had with people like you, people doing diversity or social justice work, what's the number one thing in your mind if you know that their past experiences have been bad?
Oh, you gotta make them laugh in the first 5 minutes. And I use humor. It's a tool that I have at my disposal, so I recognize that not all facilitators can do that, but you could also manufacture that, which is why I use GIFs. I use them in everything because it makes people feel like, oh wait, why is she? Is that funny? Like, I think, I think people aren't expecting it, right? Especially if they've had a bad experience. B, it's a super easy, accessible way to use pop culture, which, you know, may or may not. But the good news is that you can get the pop culture reference, but if you don't know the pop culture reference, you can see the emotion on someone's face, and I can explain it to you what you're feeling. So there are some that I use all the time. The Beyonce hair flip is like my favorite. When we talk about nailing a point, I like show that. I'm like, how'd you feel about yourselves? You feeling pretty good? Yeah, y'all did good. And I'll show it, and they're like, oh! Like, the Beyonce fans are passing out. And the people who don't get it are like, oh my gosh, you just showed a woman doing a hair flip. This is not your standard boring PowerPoint, right? Yeah. Like, so something needs to feel and look differently for them than how I perceive I've experienced training.
Got it.
I want to have a freaking good time.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to say, like, that was 3 hours I would like back. I would like to laugh. I would like to get connected to. I would like I just want to walk away saying that wasn't awful. If my baseline assessment says, was it awful or not awful, and they can just check not awful, that would be so dope. Like, I would just be like, yes, not awful.
That's if you manufacture that evaluation for us. You totally,
I mean, it's simple.
Yeah.
Awful.
Facilitating XYZ.
I was just about to say my new favorite feedback form. Diversity training. Was it awful? Not awful. Not awful. Learning outcome.
Winning.
No liker, just check boxes. Binary options. We know this gets in the way of a lot of what we were talking about, but yeah, love it.
I want to hear that extra feedback. Was it because I think we also live in an age of the critic, right?
Yeah.
And this is the shaming stuff, right? Because part of that shaming, and I know we have to get to the lightning round, but I think there's some good recircling back around. It also feels good sometimes nowadays to make other people feel badly. So there is some ego involved when we choose to jump on the shame train for others, and that we just critique to critique. I was filling out something earlier today, and I feel some type of way about it. But I had to really sit with myself and say, am I critiquing the right thing? Or am I critiquing the entity that I'm frustrated with? Or the person that's represented in this entity? Like, I can just be pissed and I want to find something, and so sometimes the value of less choices and less write-in space is helpful, and then you find the way to get that another way. And I know, I don't have the super secret sauce to that, because there is none. Because I think we also like to critique sometimes, and I'm just going to let you not occupy that critique space for a little bit, and just tell me the basics, good or not good.
It's so interesting because it flies in the face of so many of the trends that I've been seeing in trainings and in conferences, like
higher ed.
Conferences I've been to, higher ed, yeah, it's like so many evaluations out the wazoo. And one of my favorite conferences that I go to almost every year is thinking about adding like live feedback as the presentation is happening in a few different ways for the conference presenters, and I was just like, that's probably too much. Like, how do you even, as a presenter, make sense of that? If like as the presentation's happening, you're getting feedback from people, like that's going to be so derailing. But anyway, whole other conversation we could have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that, like, it does circle back to something we talked about earlier, which is that, like, if you, especially for social justice stuff, like if you think of that volcano effect, like so often people are going to be like, this sucks, this doesn't feel good, I don't like this feels icky, I can't believe I have privilege, I didn't know that, like, and none of that is going to be like, this was a great workshop.
I know. I feel crappy about myself because the world isn't fair. No one's going to be like, yeah, check, great, I love it.
Great. They could check.
Highly recommend.
Awful. But they're definitely not halfway through the workshop going to be like, I am enjoying this experience. Like, growth, as you said, like, growth is not always enjoyable. So, like, getting feedback that, hey, by the way, I think I'm growing because ow, is just, like, not likely going to help anybody. And, yeah, it feeds our inner critics.
I do think, though, part of what I've started to hear is that if the most vocal person was uncomfortable, in a way that felt still accessible and not shaming, then I did some good stuff, right? So part of what also looks like, if you look at the pre and post test with some diversity training about what did you know before and what did you know after, and I feel like I know now that there's so much more out there, and that means I know less, that is actually an affirmative training experience.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
So we have to reframe how we're even interpreting the data.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not that it needs to just go up. If it goes down, that is statistically significant for me to say, I did a good job.
Yep. Yeah. And you feel, and Meg and I have talked about this a lot when a lot of institutions that want to create some institutional data, it's, there's a moment when you make that realization where I feel like, am I a snake oil salesman? Like, am I just reinterpreting this in the way that I want? But it's true. And then you have to convince other people, some institution that actually people knowing how much they don't know is one of the biggest learning outcomes that could happen in 101 type training. Yeah. That's not going to look good on your data, though. If you go then to your board of trustees and you're like, look, we taught all these people they don't know anything. Like, that's what we spent that $6,000 on. Is that a good use?
Yeah, which makes me think, I mean, we're in the process of kind of strategic planning and doing some learning outcomes and assessment ourselves, and part of what I'm committed to and I've been trying to tell the folks to do, I want to make sure it's so clear. Not 55 million learning outcomes. Let's try 4 that we can measure consistently all over the place. And let's have them be super straightforward, super clear, and just those 4. That's it. Did you know more about yourself? Did you feel like you moved, either in a positive or negative direction? I don't care. Like, that kind of stuff is what we need to be assessing, because that's the why that I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here to challenge you and to help you explore stuff that you weren't doing before. You're going to transform into what I don't know, and that's not my job to predict that. But I'd like you to transform either deeper entrenched into who you were, or fully transformed into the person that is now differently knowing yourself. I don't know. I think that just makes it easier.
Oh man, there's so much more. I feel like we are just getting warmed up.
It's like 7:59. What happened?
Yeah. I know. Are you still good to hang out for a couple more minutes, Trey?
Yeah.
To do some rapid fire questions? Okay.
I am.
Because man, I just feel like we just did the what, and we're just getting started. But okay, here we go. Some
stretching out
questions. So Rapid fire in the sense that we will be biting our tongues in our responses, and
Okay.
you feel free to answer at whatever length feels comfortable.
Okay. I'll try to keep it brief though, because I'm a talker.
Okay. So, what are 3 words that you would use to describe facilitation?
Oh, sorry. Organic. Fun and revealing.
That's a good one. What is something that you still need to be reminded of as a facilitator?
Oh, stop judging. You don't know that person's story by the way that they look or are showing up in the space. I have to constantly remind myself to stop doing that. I think you walk in looking like X or presenting as X, and then I think I know your story. And I am so excited to be wrong because it helps me stop doing that.
If you could pick one ground rule or a group norm and then apply it to the entire world and everyone would have to follow it, what would it be?
I think do unto others as they would have done unto themselves. I mean, that platinum rule is super dope because there's so much stuff I get to sneak in that because you have to actually know what they want. You actually have to check it against your own stuff. You have to find out how to deliver it. And then embedded in that is like all this identity stuff. So like I figure that just serves the whole thing. It's kind of like living in a just way. Do unto others as they would have done unto themselves. For people with less resources, they would like more resources. For people that have less power, they would like a little bit more power. With people with less voice, they'd like more voice. For people with a safety gap, they'd like safety. Do unto others as they would have done unto themselves. And that way, and I just checked with my, Lynn, our associate director, who is probably she's my favorite person on the planet, and she just said it so simply the other day. There's enough to go around. There is enough to go around for everyone. It is just some arbitrary system that has decided on how to divide it up poorly.
That's so true, and I couldn't be more excited to hear you say the platinum rule in this talk, so thank you.
Yay! You did not pay me for that. I came up with it on my own.
It's so good. Okay, different tone here. What stresses you out as a facilitator, or what is one of your biggest stressors?
Feeling a little bit flat. I think facilitation takes a lot of energy, and sometimes I am horrible at not sleeping the night before or trying to tweak at the last minute and staying up later than I should and not being fully rested. My fear is that I'm so tired and it takes so much energy that I'm literally just spent for the day. And so I think not being adequately rested in order to do that, because my brain isn't firing on all cylinders, and I get a little wonky, and sometimes I hear myself and I'm like, this is not where I wanted it to go. And it's often because I'm tired.
That's right.
Totally. Okay. What is a piece of facilitation advice that you would like to give your 5-year-ago self?
Don't take it personally. My 5-year-old self and my current self wants to be liked. And that is an easy trap to let people derail what you actually were trying to do. And that resistance sometimes they go to a currency that is social capital, and they try to use that to sway kind of the dynamics of what's happening. And so I really love being liked and well received. It's something that feels comfortable for me. I love nonverbals, and when that's not happening, I could start to panic, and I need to just trust in what we're doing.
That's great. What is a unique or the most unique place you've ever facilitated?
I think facilitation is also not always in a small intergroup dialogue. Facilitation is one-on-one conversations. Like I just said goodbye to a student who I had facilitated with and in front of in multiple facets. And we met the first time to say goodbye, and it wasn't done. And then she said, well, let's have lunch tomorrow. And I said, okay. And I knew something needed to happen, and I didn't know what it was until I kind of said, I'm worried about you thinking this way about yourself, and I think that that's wrong. And she was like, I'm so grateful. Like, we had this really deep conversation, right? So I think the weirdest places I facilitate are when I don't know if I'm doing it yet. Like, I'm live learning that I'm like, wait a minute, I think I need to have a plan. Like, and that can be, I mean, we were eating, French toast, and I'm thinking about, I think there's an outcome and I don't know what it is yet. So it's those places where the facilitation sneaks up on you, right? Uh, and that's everywhere from advising a student group that literally are fighting over where the donations for Flint are going to go, and they're yelling at each other on the group me, and I'm facilitating in the group me, right? Like, it's all of those, and it's in the planned moment that, and I think it's also in the moments after a presentation when someone walks up and says, this was deeply resonant for me because where I'm from, this never happens, and I just need community. That is a facilitated conversation as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay. What is a, like, not directly facilitation related experience that you think every facilitator should have?
So one more time?
So what's an experience that isn't like doing facilitation that you think every facilitator should have?
Let's see. That's a good one. Part of me is thinking that you should be facilitated always. Like, you need to be in the role of watching facilitation. Like, I love watching good facilitators, and it's like, oh, I saw what you did. I'm going to steal that, and I'm going to write that down. That being facilitated is so critical. And I think what I also, what's a good experience? I think also oh gosh, for lack of a better word, I think you should kind of like be in some kind of reflective practice. And I'd say therapy has made me a better facilitator, because I reflect about how I'm experiencing the world. So, and that is a luxury that I have because I have both health insurance and the privilege to pay for it. So I recognize that not everyone has that. So what is a reflective practice? Because I'm not good at meditating. I haven't yet mastered the art of meditating. Okay, let me say it that way. And I operate. My brain operates in a way where I feel like I'm always doing it wrong. And so for me, therapy is meditative, and that's my way of making meaning and reflecting deeply on how I'm showing up and experiencing the world. So whatever that looks like for folks, they need to just spend time in their own heads. And I'm someone who super compartmentalizes things. And so I love to like just put boxes that don't touch each other. It's all interconnected. The more I do this work, the more I realize it's all interconnected, right? It's not position neutral. It's not content neutral. I come in with all my stuff, and I need to bring that with me, sit it out there, and say, okay, here's what we're dealing with here, people. What do you got? And that has always made me a better facilitator.
That's great. What book do you recommend the most, if there's a book that you recommend to people?
Other than the authors I'm talking to right now, I think, for me, it's listening to people who do this work I really respect, and just getting the books that they recommend. And it's having the time to do it. I think you also can read facilitations and exercises that are available out there in the universe, right? Like, it's amazing the stuff that's on the Google. And you can just go and take a trip and go down what my colleague Abby and I like to call a rabbit hole, an intellectual rabbit hole, where you just look at an author and find another author and find another author, and then you just kind of go and you look up and it's 20 minutes later and you're like, wait, what were we doing? And those are the moments when I think differently about it, And I would not have thought about it had I not just traveled and followed the interest when it's there. So there's The Art of Facilitation. I think that's like the big one. It's on my bookshelf. I've opened several chapters and moments. Facilitating for diversity and social justice is always helpful, and I think that that's a reference where I'm like, all right, I got to get my mind right. right? Especially, you know what though? Here's a good thing to say. Those moments when I'm feeling a little bit fiery, that's when I need to read. Because I need to get back to basics. Because if I'm fiery, it's about me, appropriately, because I'm feeling hurt or harmed. And what that lets me do is realize there's something bigger out there.
Is there any book that is not like, doesn't have the word facilitation on the cover, or people wouldn't think of as a facilitation book, but that you're like, this is a book you gotta read?
Oh my gosh, all the stuff around like knowing yourself, emotional intelligence, like Brené Brown, everything, all of it, around how do I show up, how do I know, where's my ego involved, what am I afraid of, because that is what I think has made me a better facilitator. Answering those really hard questions that are like, oh, I actually just want this person to like me, so I'm willing to do whatever it takes in this facilitation to get that, at the expense of the learning outcomes or the goals. And that doesn't feel so good. Or I'm going to make that choice, and that's the best choice I can make today, and I'll have to unpack it in therapy later. I mean, I don't know. You know, so I think anything around emotional intelligence. Listen, I honestly think the KonMari method, the life-changing art of tidying up, that's my jam. Because it's helped me be organized and not super like have my papers everywhere and where is this handout, and it's tidying up my Google Drive so that I have enough space to know where these exercises are, and it's ordering my life in ways that make me a better facilitator.
There you go.
The arc of facilitation is like it's like the creation of a symphony. You have to write the curriculum and create the notes, and then you have to practice and try it out. But then you get to come back to that later and use that good stuff again. And if you can find it, it's kind of helpful.
And then when someone asks you a good question or a bad question, you could say, does that question spark joy for me? Should I answer it?
Yes!
Training?
Oh my gosh!
And if it doesn't, you just drop it and move on to the next question.
So real. Do I know? And you know what? Honestly, it also is a good test on if I'm feeling crunchy or not. Am I feeling like I want to get in it and dig into it, or do I feel like I want to run away from it or just try to not deal with it right away? Is it hard for me to let go of? And I need to figure out what's behind that.
Are there any online resources, blogs, resources, websites, whatever, that you think folks should check out?
I think anything having to do, I think anytime you just read stuff to help you, and I think anytime someone has either written an article that takes something that wasn't connected before to social justice but now is. Just today we were talking in the office about this thing going around on the giving tree.
Yeah, I saw that, the privilege
if people
tree.
haven't seen that, go Google it. It's the privilege tree, and it's all the stuff that's kind of happened this summer around kind of white male privilege sitting in a way that like has the society kind of shields them, similar to the giving tree. And I love that, because what that does is it's creative. And that creativity of the article will spark a way for me to process it, and then I'll think about how to do it, and then I'll think about what's another childhood book that I love, and then I'm building curriculum in my head before I even need it.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. If you have one piece of advice for people listening or who might tune in later, it can be about anything you want. What's one piece of advice you'd like to give people?
Oh gosh, one? Ooh. I just thought of three. Okay. Yeah, just know yourself before you even go in the room. You got to know what you're walking in with, and know your audience and what they want to have happen, not what you want to have happen. What are their goals? And then have a blast and try to do it in a way that people will ask you to come back again. You kind of want to leave a facilitation better than you found it, as much as you can. And that may not be positive and sunshine and snowflakes, but it may be they're now thinking differently or asking questions that weren't there before.
Nice. Thank you so much, Trey.
Yay! This is great. So, Trey, is there anywhere like that, like, I don't know if you Twitters or if you Facebook, or if people wanted to like chat with you more, connect with you, or get a hold of some of those gifts? Like,
yeah. Oh, heck yeah. Oh my gosh, so many.
Can we share those? Would you share those with us? And
yeah,
we
I'm at Trey Boynton on Twitter, and I think I'm Trey Boynton on the Book of Face, and I'm on the Instagram at Trelawney B. That's my full name.
Okay.
So I'm on multiple things, and you can go to the Mesa website at U of M, Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs, and find me there.
Perfect. We'll link to all of those. Trey, thank you so much. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
For all
This was
that.
so fun. I learned a lot. I mean, when you tell your story or when you kind of are doing this, it's always helpful. This is self-reflective practice, so this is helpful for me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right.
Tune in.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.